Ukraine's Saab AWACS has been spotted flying over its own territory, which means Russia's spring offensive is going to run into some headwinds. For the past year, the Swedish Saab 340 AEW&C, the ASC 890, has been one of those weapons transfers that defense nerds got very excited about, while normal people understandably said, okay, neat plane. But now footage has surfaced that appears to show one of Ukraine's Saab 340 airborne early warning aircraft operating over the country. This isn't just another airplane, it is a flying radar station, a fighter controller, and a giant airborne I can see what you're trying to do machine. Now, Ukraine has never had this kind of capability before. Russia knows exactly how valuable these aircraft are because Ukraine has spent the war trying to kill Russia's own A-50 mainstay AWACS fleet for precisely the same reason. Hey friends, Wes O'Donnell here, Army and Air Force veteran, where I served as a bullet catcher in the former and on the AWACS in the latter. And today, I want to break down what this thing actually does, why it matters for drones and cruise missiles, and most importantly, how it could help Ukraine push back against one of the ugliest tactical problems on the current battlefield, Russia's glide bomb attacks along the front. Now, Sweden announced the transfer of two Saab 340 airborne warning and control aircraft to Ukraine back in May of 2024 as part of its biggest military aid package to Kyiv at that time, worth around $1.25 billion. They warned that it would take roughly a year to train aircrew and maintainers and prepare the ground infrastructure, so the timeline always pointed toward 2025 into 2026 as the period when these aircraft might actually become relevant, which is exactly where we are now. The Ukrainian Air Force is believed to have received two of these aircraft. In Swedish service, they're known as the ASC 890 or the S-100D Argus. Their heart is the Saab Erieye ASA radar mounted in that very distinctive balance beam fairing on the top of the fuselage. The radar can detect air and sea targets out to about 280 miles, while the aircraft typically operates around 20,000 feet and can reportedly track up to 1,000 airborne and 500 surface targets simultaneously. That is a huge jump in situational awareness for a country that until now has had to stitch together its air picture from ground radars, fighters, SAM batteries, and whatever else wasn't currently being exploded. And the really important phrase here is look-down capability. A ground radar sees the world through terrain, hills, forests, buildings, the curvature of the earth. All of that makes low-flying targets a headache. A radar plane sees from above. That makes it especially useful against low-flying drones and cruise missiles. Now, let's talk about the glide bomb problem because this is where the story gets more interesting than just Ukraine has a new plane. Russian glide bombs, whether we're talking about fab bombs with UMPK kits or related standoff strike behavior, have been effective for one very simple reason. The launch aircraft does not need to enter the kill zone. Russian Su-34s and other strike aircraft can approach the front, pop up at a standoff range, release the bomb, and turn away before Ukrainian ground-based air defenses can reliably punish them. The bomb then glides into Ukrainian positions, towns, fortifications, and supply nodes with deeply antisocial intent. That's the real problem. The bomb itself is hard to stop once it's already in the air, especially at scale. So the smarter play is to threaten the launch chain. Find the aircraft earlier, track it sooner, vector fighters or alert SAM batteries faster, force Russian pilots to launch from worse profiles, longer ranges, or not at all. That is exactly where an AWACS starts earning its keep, because the Saab 340 doesn't need to spot the bomb to matter, it needs to spot the bomber. Now, the Erieye should be able to detect targets, prioritize them, and then assign them to fighters for interception inside Ukraine's layered air defense network. That's an enormous shift. Right now, Ukraine often has to fight with fragmented awareness. A fighter pilot may know what his own radar sees. A SAM battery knows what its own radar sees. A ground controller may have a partial picture, but AWACS fuses that into one air picture and starts acting like a quarterback in the sky. That matters for glide bombs because Russian strike aircraft tend to follow patterns. They don't teleport in from another dimension. They stage, they route, and they approach under threat considerations of their own. A radar aircraft orbiting in safer Western airspace can still extend the picture far enough to make life more difficult for Russian crews approaching the release zone. Now, does that mean Ukraine suddenly gets a giant red button marked Delete Su-34? No. there are constraints. First of all, Ukraine likely operates these aircraft from the far west of the country and moves them between airfields to reduce exposure to Russian strikes. With only 2 aircraft, around-the-clock coverage is impossible. One may be held on alert for especially intense missile and drone barrages, so this is not a magic blanket over the whole country 24 hours a day. It is a scarce, high-value combat enhancer that Ukraine will almost certainly use carefully, but even limited coverage changes behavior. If Russian strike crews now have to assume that a higher quality airborne radar picture may be watching for them, they may need to launch earlier, lower, farther back, or under more escort. All of those things can degrade bombing accuracy or reduce sortie flexibility. And once you make glide bombs less precise, less timely, or less masked, you've already improved Ukrainian survivability at the front. That is a tactical win. Not perfection, but friction. There's another limitation we have to talk about. Ukraine would occasionally need to get these aircraft closer to the front than it would probably like, simply because there is a range limitation on the Erieye radar. And in order to see these Russian glide bomb jets, they can't do it from Lviv. So I should also mention the ideal version of this setup would use NATO standard Link 16 to push the Erieye radar picture directly to Ukrainian F-16s, Mirage 2000s, and potentially Western air defense systems. In theory, that would be the dream. The Saab spots the threat, the fighters see the picture in near real time, and the whole network starts acting like a proper Western air defense architecture instead of the patchwork held together by caffeine and ingenuity. The problem is that reporting in late 2024 suggested Ukraine's F-16s may have had Link 16 removed or disabled because of fears the system could fall into the Russian hands. As of right now, it remains unclear whether Link 16 connectivity is actually available to Ukraine. At the same time, there was some reporting back in March of 2025 tied to the AWACS delivery timeline that mentioned certain modifications on the F-16, which strongly suggests some kind of networking issue was being addressed. So where does that leave us? Well, even without Link 16, the AWACS is still useful. It can still provide greatly improved surveillance and feed information through ground control sensors. That may be slower and clunkier than the full NATO version, but it is still vastly better than not having an airborne early warning aircraft at all. And if Link 16 or some other functional equivalent is live, then this gets much more serious much faster, because now your F-16s are not hunting with one eye closed. They are being fed a broader air picture from a platform whose whole purpose is to see farther and assign work. And there's another reason this matters. Later versions of the Erieye radar may include SAR and GMTI functions, synthetic aperture radar and ground moving target indication. But it's unclear whether Ukraine has that capability. If it does, even in limited form, then the aircraft isn't just useful for air defense. It starts becoming useful for monitoring Russian troop movements and surface activity too. That would turn the Saab from a defensive asset into something with broader operational value. And there's a future-facing angle here as well. If Ukraine ever ends up with Saab Gripens, the Saab 340 and the Gripen combination would make a tailor-made air defense solution. That's not today's story, but it's a reminder that Sweden didn't just donate an aircraft, it potentially donated the first piece of a much more coherent future air defense ecosystem. Russia, of course, understands all of this. Russia's own A-50 fleet has taken repeated hits during the war because these aircraft are so valuable as combat enhancers. That is the best argument for why Ukraine will operate its Saab aircraft conservatively, quietly, and probably much further west than some viewers would like. If you only have 2 of something this valuable, you don't fly it like you're trying to impress a parade crowd, you treat it like gold with wings. So here's the bottom line. Ukraine's Saab AWACS is not just a new toy, it is a new layer in the kill chain. It sees farther than ground radars against low-flying threats. It can help fighters and air defenses prioritize targets. It can complicate Russia's strike planning. And against glide bombs specifically, it may not stop the bomb in flight, but it can help go after the thing that matters most, the aircraft dropping it. That's how you start pushing back against standoff bombing. You don't wait until the bomb is already gliding towards your trench like an angry refrigerator. You reach backward in the chain, find the launch aircraft sooner, and make that pilot's day end badly. Ukraine has spent most of this war improvising its air defense picture under pressure. The Saab 340 does not solve every problem, but it does make the sky more legible, and in modern war, the side that sees first usually gets to ruin the other guy's plan. That's it for today, my friends. When it comes to Ukraine aid, Sweden is in the big leagues here. Consider subscribing if this video was informative. It helps the channel grow and prevents me from needing to sell my soul as a McKinsey consultant. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.